Hi, welcome back to The Basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we continue our in-depth look at pop culture in the year 1972. We finally reached the fourth quarter, the months of October, November, and December, and again we'll make this a two-parter. There's much too much to get to in one episode. So today we'll try to get to music as the quarter began, new releases in music, maybe a little bit about television, and try to get through movies, and then hopefully we wind the whole thing up with one more episode about the fourth quarter of 72 next time. So let's begin with the album chart as the quarter began. That first album chart came out on October 7th, and sitting at number one for the 8th of its eventual 9 weeks in the number one position was Chicago 5. Beginning its 4-week run in the number 2 spot was Leon Russell's Carney album. At number 3 was Rod Stewart's Never a Dull Moment. This had gone to number 2 for 3 weeks in September. In the number 4 position, we had Cheech and Chong's Big Bamboo album with its hit comedy recording, Sister Mary Elephant. This had gone to number 2 the week prior. In the number 5 position was Elton John's Honky Chateau album. This is the only album still in the top 10 from 3 months earlier at the beginning of the third quarter. Three Dog Night's Seven Separate Fools album was in the first of its 2 weeks at its number 6 peak. Neil Diamond's Moods album had dropped to number 7 after spending 3 weeks at number 5 in September. Curtis Mayfield's Superfly album had just entered the top 10 at number 8. It'll go to number 1 for 4 weeks in late October and early November. At its number 9 peak was Himself, featuring Alone Again Naturally by Gilbert O'Sullivan. At number 10 was the London Chuck Berry Sessions. This was Chuck Berry's first album ever to break into the top 20. It'll go to number 8 for 3 weeks in late October and early November. Turning to hit singles, the number 1 single on October 7th was Baby Don't Get Hooked on Me by Mac Davis. At number 2 was Michael Jackson's Ben. It would hit number 1 the next week, October 14th. At its number 3 peak was Backstabbers by the OJs. Number 4 was The Main Ingredients' Everybody Plays the Fool, which will go to number 3 the next week, October 14th. The Raspberries' Go All the Way was at its number 5 peak. Bill Withers' Use Me was at number 6. It'll reach the number 2 position the next week and stay there for 2 weeks. Burnin' Love by Elvis Presley was at number 7. It'll follow Use Me into the number 2 spot on October 28th. Three Dog Night's hit Black and White was at number 8. It had been at number 1 on September 16th. And My Ding-a-Ling by Chuck Berry was at number 9. It'll go to number 1 for 2 weeks beginning October 21st. After all the great records he made in the 50s and early 60s, this was his first and only number 1 single. And rounding out the top 10 was Hot Butter's instrumental hit Popcorn, which will peak at number 9 on October 21st. Top 10 singles that would come and go in the fourth quarter included Johnny Nash's I Can See Clearly Now, another reggae-inspired U.S. hit following Mother and Child Reunion earlier in the year. It featured backing vocals by Jamaica's Fabulous Five Incorporated. It'll be number 4 for 4 weeks beginning November 4th. The Moody Blues' Nights in White Satin will reach number 2 for 2 weeks beginning November 4th. Freddie's Dead, the theme from Superfly by Curtis Mayfield, will be number 4 for 2 weeks beginning November 4th. Rick Nelson's Garden Party will hit the top 10. It's Rick Nelson's first time in the top 20 since the British invasion early in 1964. On October 28th, Chuck Berry will be at number 1, Elvis Presley at number 2, and Rick Nelson at number 7, making the top 10 look a lot more like 1958 than the early 70s. Garden Party will peak at number 6 on November 4th and stay there for 2 weeks. Danny O'Keefe's Good Time Charlie's Got the Blues will peak at number 9 on November 4th. I'd Love You to Want Me by Lobo will go to number 2 for 2 weeks beginning November 18th. I'll Be Around by the Spinners will go to number 3 for 2 weeks beginning November 18th. And Convention 72 by the Delegates, a novelty drop-in record using clips from current hits to build comedy interviews with current politicians and celebrities. It'll peak at number 8 on November 11th, nearly 2 weeks after the election, possibly giving a clue as to how long it actually took from the time a record actually peaked in popularity to the time it peaked on the charts in those days. The Eagles' Witchy Woman would go to number 9 on November 18th. And the Temptations' Papa Was a Rollin' Stone would hit number 1 on December 2nd. Seals and Crofts' Summer Breeze would peak at number 6 for 2 weeks on November 25th, long after the summer had actually gone. If you don't know me by now by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes will hit number 3 for 2 weeks beginning December 9th. Ventura Highway by America will hit number 8 for 2 weeks beginning November 9th. And I'm Stone in Love with You by the Stylistics will hit number 10 for 2 weeks beginning November 9th. Major new album releases in October included Caravanserai by Santana on October 11th. On October 14th, we got Crazy Horses by the Osmonds. The squeaky clean Osmonds were getting heavy with their new album. The title track single fell somewhere between heavy metal and a parody of heavy metal, and the single Hold Her Tight co-opted the rhythm from Led Zeppelin's The Immigrant Song. It kind of worked for them, at least chart-wise, with both singles peaking at number 14. And on October 23rd, we got Al Green's I'm Still in Love with You album. Stevie Wonder had regularly been turning out great singles for almost a decade. With the release earlier in the year of his album Music of My Mind, he'd begun a new contract with Motown that gave him complete artistic control over his product, with him writing, producing, and playing the majority of the instruments. Things really got underway with the release of Talking Book on October 28th, which began Stevie Wonder's imperial phase as an album artist. It's a great album with 2 eventual number 1 hits, Superstition and You Are the Sunshine of My Life, and a lot of other amazing tracks that could have been hits, including You and I, Big Brother, and I Believe When I Fall in Love It Will Be Forever. There's nothing less than stellar on the entire album. If this album had come out a decade later, I think it would have spun off hits for a year or two the way Thriller and Born in the USA would. As it was in the early 70s, after 2 singles, even 2 number 1 singles, the album was considered played out for any more hits. Stevie Wonder would be back just 9 months later with the nearly as great Inner Visions album. Of course, we'll talk about that when we come to 1973. Talking Book will go to number 3 in February of 1973. Also released in October was Diana Ross's soundtrack album Lady Sings the Blues. It'll go to number 1 in April of 73. Carole King's Rhymes and Reasons album and the London Symphony Orchestra's all-star recording of The Who's rock opera Tommy, featuring guest vocals by members of The Who, Steve Winwood, Mary Clayton, Richie Havens, Rod Stewart, and Ringo Starr, among many others. This will go to number 5 in February of 73. Moving on to November, on November 1st, we got James Taylor's One Man Dog album. And on the 7th, Bette Midler's The Divine Miss M album. This will go to number 9 in March of 73. On the 13th of November, we got I Am Woman by Helen Reddy. It'll go to number 14 early in 73. On November 15th came America's sophomore album, Homecoming. This would go to number 9 for the entire month of January 1973, and though nobody would recognize it yet, it also began America's long tradition of album titles beginning with the letter H. On November 17th came the Moody Blues' Seventh Sojourn album. Joni Mitchell's For the Roses album was released in November of 1972. This will go to number 11 early in 1973. Also released was the Edgar Winter Group's They Only Come Out at Night. This one will take a while, but the album will eventually go all the way to number 3 on June 9th, 1973, based on the strength of their instrumental hit, Frankenstein. And also released in November was Creedence Gold by Creedence Clearwater Revival. With the band having officially broken up a month earlier, it was high time for a greatest hits album ahead of the holidays. Creedence Gold would go to number 15 early in the new year. Other big albums released in November included The World is a Ghetto by War with its top 10 title track. A second single, Cisco Kid, will go to number 2 in early 1973. This will be number 1 for 2 weeks in February of 73. And Carly Simon's No Secrets album, which would be number 1 for 3 weeks at the end of January and early February of 73. Besides both releasing hit albums in November, Carly Simon and James Taylor get married on November 3rd in Paul Simon's New York apartment. Later that same night, Carly Simon will join James Taylor on stage at his Radio City Music Hall show, where they'll publicly announce their marriage. The couple will depart for a honeymoon in Hawaii while both their albums are flying up the chart. On December 8th came Marvin Gaye's soundtrack to the movie Trouble Man, starring Robert Hooks and directed by Ivan Dixon. The album was entirely written, produced, and sung by Marvin Gaye. It'll go to number 14 early in 1973. On December 9th, we got Hot August Night by Neil Diamond, a double live album recorded on August 24th, 1972 at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles. It'll go to number 5 for 2 weeks beginning February 17th, 1973. And just in time for the holidays, on December 11th came More Hot Rocks, Big Hits and Phased Cookies by the Rolling Stones. Last year's holiday best of, Hot Rocks, had gone all the way to number 4. So for this year's holiday sales, we got More Hot Rocks. This would go to number 9 for 3 weeks beginning February 17th. Another notable album in the fourth quarter was Days of Future Past by the Moody Blues. The album, when originally released in November 1967, had been a moderate success, eventually rising to number 61 on August 31st, 1968. The single, Nights in White Satin, which had only reached 103 on its initial release, became a major hit in the fall of 1972, and the album had re-entered the chart and had gone to number 3 for 5 weeks beginning October 21st. Turning to television, on November 24th, the late Friday night in-concert series produced by Don Kirshner premiered on ABC, presenting modern rock acts live in concert. The first episode features Curtis Mayfield, Seals and Crofts, Bo Diddley, and very special guest Alice Cooper. WPRC-TV, Channel 12 in Cincinnati, pulls the plug on Alice Cooper's performance after 20 minutes, saying the concert had stopped being music and art and had turned into pornography. By pulling the plug that early, they missed the best part, the promo film for their great new single Elected, which had been released in October just ahead of the presidential election. Alice Cooper's performance might have been a little wild and intense by some people's standards, but there was certainly nothing pornographic about it. In any case, I'm sure the controversy was a bit of publicity that Alice Cooper and Don Kirshner didn't mind at all, and the series began airing every other Friday night starting on January 19, 1973. In December 1972, CBS moved the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour from Friday to Wednesday nights. This got it away from stiff competition from NBC's Sanford & Son, and Sonny and Cher would soon become the highest-rated variety series on TV. We'll talk a little bit more about television next time, but now let's quickly move on to new movie releases. October 12th saw the release of Lady Sings the Blues, starring Diana Ross and Billy D. Williams in the life story of Billie Holiday. It'll go to number 1 on November 22nd for 4 weeks. On November 3rd came the thriller The Valachi Papers, which will be number 1 the weeks of November 8th and November 15th. On December 11th, Peter O'Toole and Sophia Loren in the musical Man of La Mancha. It'll be number 1 on December 20th. On December 13th came Irwin Allen's production of The Poseidon Adventure, a star-studded disaster movie set aboard an ocean liner. Who will survive? It'll be number 1 at year-end and for 10 of the first 12 weeks of 1973. It'll become the second highest-grossing film of the year after The Godfather. On December 17th came The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, starring Paul Newman. Also the comedy Pete and Tilly, starring Walter Matthau and Carol Burnett. And Christopher Lee was back as the Count in Hammer Films' Dracula, AD 1972. Along with The Night Stalker and Blackula earlier in the year, this continued the novel new trend of taking vampires out of the Gothic past and putting them in a modern-day setting. On December 19th, we got the drama Across 110th Street and The Getaway, starring Steve McQueen and Ali MacGraw. The Getaway would be number 1 for 2 non-consecutive weeks early in 1973. And on December 21st, another box office hit starring Robert Redford as Jeremiah Johnson, a mountain man living alone in the Rocky Mountain wilderness of the 19th century. And that's where we'll leave it for this week. Next time we'll return to the fourth quarter of 1972 to talk about news, more about music and television, and of course what the Beach Boys were up to. And then, hopefully and presumably, we will bring 1972 in for a landing. Hope you're enjoying this very deep dive. I look forward to your comments and feedback. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't done that. I always appreciate it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a good week. Bye.